stay in studio. I go live, and immediately the platform tells me, "Hey, do you want to leave?" It's like, no, I don't. Right, good start. My camera isn't focusing. There we go. That's better. Right. Hello, everyone. We should be live, so if you can hear us, please tell us. Speak loud and clearly in the chat. How are you all doing on this beautiful Sunday evening, morning / midday, wherever you are? Justin, how are you?
I'm doing all right. It's been very cold here for, like, yesterday got down to minus 22 Celsius, which is pretty cold for November. It's not unheard of, but I've gotten used to pretty mild Novembers in the last few years, so it was kind of rough yesterday.
For those wondering what godforsaken place Justin lives in, it's called Canada. That's where
Does
he
the
lives.
UK like get down to that cold very
I
often
mean,
or
in the
ever?
north, yeah, in Scotland, it
Okay.
does go into the minus Celsius. But
Okay.
the interesting bit for us has been the very long summer where it's been quite mild up to, I want to say, October, end of October, and then somewhere between end of October and now, somebody like flicked the switch, and it is quite cold now. I say that
Okay.
having had roughly 10 degrees on this weekend and having had the sunshine on this Sunday, but for the last couple of days, it has been very, very cold. Well, cold in like continental Europe, UK standards. So around the point of freezing, but not actually
Okay.
over it. Edward is in the chat and says that the sound is good and the picture is good. Well, hopefully that's going to stay. Not last week. I wish it was last week. A couple of weeks ago when I did the last stream, I kept dropping. Justin was just fine, but I kept dropping. And in the preliminary period where both of us has been setting up the stream, the same thing happened again. So hopefully it will actually hold now that we are live, but no guarantees thanks to British internet. Now, Justin, tell me, what sort of Airpower readings have you been conducting or since our last stream, which was, let me check, 3 weeks ago. Actually, we've increased the tempo, could we say, of streaming?
Yeah, like we're trying to aim for one a month, and we're gonna
Yes.
try and keep it. So the next one will be, I guess, probably in the middle of the holiday period at some point. But as far as my readings go, so I haven't started anything specifically because there's classified reason for that. It's Airpower related, and I'm really excited. Basically, I'm going to be looking at. Apparently, my microphone's a little distorted. It might be just the quality of the mic. I might have to try and plug in my.
I'm not hearing any
snowball.
distortions.
Okay, interesting.
I mean, any technical distortions. But
yeah. Okay. Morning, cannon fodder. Anyway, so I've been asked to review a manuscript of a book that's going to be published in the coming months that I'm very excited about. I followed the project for many years, and they reached out to me, of all people, to have a look at it. And Chris is going to maybe take a look at a few parts of it as well. I won't say anything more than that because it's not a published manuscript yet, but it's a very cool project. I think the next up that I'm going to start is probably Richard Dunn's South Pacific Air War, which is very intimidating, and I will show you why.
Is it big, Precious? Is it big?
It is. So I unfortunately walked into it with my post on Blue Sky when I first got it because I talked about how big it was.
Yeah.
And everyone was predictably dragging me, but it is incomprehensibly large. It's not going to come through in camera, but like the print even is not small or large.
Oh, that's dense. Yeah.
And this is from January 1943 to February 1944. So it's the least studied period of the South Pacific Air War. Only that 1 year, and it is how many pages? Like it's basically 600 including the notes. So this is going to take me a while to go through, but people probably from the channel might know Richard Dunn from us using quite often his Exploding Fuel Tanks book.
Yes.
Which is a great book on fuel tanks that explode.
And I think that's still, to this day, the only real published study on aircraft protection during World War II.
Yeah, I can't think of another one.
Yeah, there are a couple of works that like include like an overall sort of track of how protection changed on individual aircraft, but as a study on how protected fuel tanks work and where they were incorporated, armor, and so on and so forth, it is basically the only book I know about. Maybe there are some academic articles here and there, but I don't see this being a topic that can actually be used in an academic article, because usually the emphasis is different in most
Mhm.
outlets. But yeah, the Richard Dunn book, the South Pacific War, there looks very interesting, and that actually brings me sort of to my next question. And we spoke about it in the past. Yeah, we spoke about it on the last stream. Is we need to look at the Philippines in maybe a future episode and talk about why it was so important or not important for the Pacific War, specifically for the initial Japanese advance down the chain of the many islands. And then was it actually worthwhile going in there with MacArthur, which is going to open quite a few, shall we say, controversial boxes. Um, what has the army to do in the Pacific? That whole question. But yeah, we'll get to that in the future, I reckon. Or do you want to sort of jump into it now, right now, as a sort of preliminary thing?
Uh, yeah, so I think I've mentioned my handful of like off the cuff hot takes before, like I think a couple streams ago. The Philippines is interesting in the initial outset of the war in particular because I think the forces that were available there were quite substantial.
Mm,
Um, so a lot of a lot of the talk about that very early part of the war tends to focus on how weak Allied air power was in various areas, and it had a lot of problems. I think probably the strongest concentration of it was in the Philippines.
mm-hmm.
And then they also had pretty decent warning, at least that there was a war happening.
Yeah.
Um, and then, of course, there's a major controversy around why that warning was or was not acted on. There's the usual discussion of like, well, we wanted to launch the B-17s, but the airfields on Taiwan were socked in with rain and on the Japanese side. So there was a lot of consternation on the Japanese side, like, are we going to get bombed first? Um, Sometimes the make of it, I find it kind of funny. It's kind of like Schrodinger's clouds. I don't know, where it's like, okay, so the weather is so poor they can't take off, but somehow a handful of B-17s are going to accurately devastate the airfield through this cloud cover. Um, it's like it would have been nice to get bombs off first, but whether or not it would have mattered much is I think very much an open question.
Yeah.
And then, of course, later in the war, when you're talking about the reinvasion of the Philippines, and there was actually a very interesting article that very recently came out on the origin of the kamikaze that's linked to that period of the war, of course. That is quite interesting. So it's by Nick Kapoor, who is a historian of Japanese history. So he pulls in extensive Japanese sources, and he calls into question certain parts of I guess you could say, the canon around kamikaze, like
Mm,
who created it. Maybe it wasn't so spontaneous in the field with Onishi Takajiro. It was actually something that seemed to be thought about beforehand by the leadership in the Navy, at least, and then the orders were given top down to Onishi to execute it in the Philippines, which is very different. And then he kind of gets into a little bit here the reasons for that, because of course, if you can basically pin it. So Anishi kills himself like right, I think August 16th, like the day after the surrender. So it's basically he's a very convenient figure to basically point the
mm,
finger at and say he came up with it all by himself.
yeah.
And then we kind of rolled with it from there, as opposed to many senior leadership who did survive the war and go into the post-war period who may have actually been quite involved. Um, so that's kind of interesting, and there's so much to talk about with the Philippines, both in 41, 42, and in 44, 45 even. um, that we'll have to dig into one day. That's a lot of reading. to do.
Yeah,
Because
no, I mean, we'll definitely do that because I think
yeah,
it does provide a really substantial case study for us to talk about various aspects of air power. Like, I mean, obviously, we'll have to draw into a little bit into the naval side, of course. That's a given, and I guess we'll have to talk a bit about army stuff as well. But that whole area is very much sort of, I would say, defined by the air war,
hmm
and as much as could be. And there's a lot of lessons that can be drawn from that. Um, World War II analyst also said here, it's inexplicable given the U.S. Navy's stance that the Philippines couldn't be held. It's as if the two services had no concept of the other strategy. Honestly, at the start of the war in the Pacific, that is not necessarily just an American problem. That's also a British problem there with the, for example, the RAF and the forces, the British Army forces in Malaya, having very different concepts of how they're actually going to hold and how they're actually going to react in a transition to war and then during a war. It's just like there was no forcing function for these branches to necessarily put together a plan, and when they tried to put together a plan, there were so many obstacles. Not all of them being military, mind you. There's also sort of civilian obstruction in a lot of ways, with the colonies often considering themselves as sort of apart from the fighting that's going on already in China and in Europe, and not really wanting to have any interference with their civilian life. Popham runs into that consistently in Singapore during the initial period when he tries to um, sort of set the stage for the area, for the forces that are in the area to prepare for a potential Japanese attack. Um, yeah, it's really interesting, and I think we also said that we're going to have a dedicated stream on the Malaya campaign at some point, didn't we?
yeah, at some point, yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of been. It'll be a while, but it'll happen.
Yeah, we optimistically it was like, oh, it's gonna be in November, and yeah, it's the 30th of November, and it hasn't happened yet. So that is definitely something that we want to do in the future. Um, Americans had no weather reporting over Japanese airfields.
Oh yeah, so the way so what I am talking about is more historiographical. So it's the Japanese themselves worried that the delay was going to lead to them being bombed, and then also some histories of it talking about how if the B-17s had been able to bomb somehow, it would have been devastating. Maybe it would have been. You know, you can sometimes hit things in poor visibility conditions, but my basic point is that it's like there's a major factor there, that being the weather, that I think sometimes gets skipped over in discussion. So yeah, the Americans just like it would have been better for the B-17s to not be on the ground when the Japanese do eventually show up. And of
Yeah.
course, there's a lot of controversy around that. There's a whole book written about just December 8th in the Philippines that I'm trying to remember the name of. It might just be called December 8th, MacArthur's Pearl Harbor, something like that. Um, I have like two of his books back there. William Bartish. Yeah, William Bartish. Um, I have to read that one because it's like a giant book just about that one day. Because it's kind of like there's so much to dig into about culpability, who's to blame, who's maybe not to blame, what do we not know, all sorts of factors like that. Um, yeah, but that's kind of been what I've been reading. What about you, Chris?
Been reading a lot of stuff that doesn't necessarily apply to the channel in that in that sort of sense. But you know all about that. Um, Still digging a bit deeper into Soviet conceptions of air assault and yeah, paratrooper operations, which is really interesting because in the 30s, wow, I mean they were actually before the purges that has come in, and Tukachevsky and all the other ones are removed from their positions, and when then many of them killed. They were really imaginative at how to reignite sort of a maneuver element into the force, because most countries from the Second World War took away defense wins against the offense, right? But apparently, this is I hadn't clocked onto this, but there was Glantz who actually, in one of his many publications, who put me on this, is that because of the Russian Civil War, which was very long, right? We always sort of think that it's like 1917, 1918, and then it's over. No, it was a longer war than that. During that time, there was a lot of sort of small unit formation actions, and a lot of it was just infantry that was relatively ill-equipped. So how you maneuver your forces and how you get them into certain positions, geographic positions, in order to set the stage, and then also how you maneuver them actually on the battlefield, became incredibly important. And that made the Soviets think more about, okay, so how can we use a certain size of a formation, let's say what would eventually be like a division or a corps level, and put them behind the enemy lines and cause a lot of havoc there. And it's really interesting to see sort of the experiments in the early 1930s on that, where they build up all these different formations that are supposed to have like already thousands of people. They want to have like 4 airborne, um, I think it was brigades even. They barely managed to scrounge one together, and it had like 200 people. So it's not really a brigade, but they set out these things, and in the future, I think I'm gonna also make a video about that, because it really is interesting. And they had like, within a year, they had like 500 different exercises with paratroopers, figuring stuff out, from like what's the optimal altitude to drop people, over to sort of what equipment should they carry, and so on and so forth. Most of them initially only had pistols, which is interesting, but I guess that just speaks to what they had at the time. So yeah, that's something. And then the other thing, based on this week's video, I am going to be launching more videos now also on the Netherlands, because in that video I sort of talked a little bit about the operations against the Netherlands, and maybe I can go into a bit more detail towards the latter half of the stream on that, but also on the whole issue of bombing Rotterdam was done basically because the Germans were panicking, because the Netherlands hadn't surrendered yet. They were on the clock, and they were just like, okay, well, we'll have to make them surrender. We're just gonna bomb the city, and that's gonna make you, which is interesting, because the general narrative surrounding Rotterdam is that it was a mistake. Like, okay, so first of all, that's wrong, because you don't just accidentally bomb a city in that way, in that concentrated manner. Like a couple of bombers, yes, but if you order an attack on a city, it must have a purpose. And the fact that they dropped the bombs after after the Luftwaffe tried to cancel the flight doesn't invalidate the fact that they were going to bomb Rotterdam because they wanted to bomb Rotterdam. So I think that's going to be quite an interesting video, where we may run into some comments as well from people that have some outdated views on the whole issue. But yeah, that's basically been my stuff, and yeah, a lot of work in the background that isn't necessarily pertinent to the channel. Still trying to continue writing on the book as well. It's been a little bit difficult just to find the time for that, but yeah, overall, it's things are looking good for 2026, I think.
Oh, so someone's actually asking for some English or Swedish interwar World War II aviation, like introductory books.
I mean, that
so I guess
depends on what
maybe
you want,
you
right?
can start with your side of things, and then I can think of something I can chill for Pacific.
I mean, it really depends on what you want to read about. If you want to read more sort of on the plain level, then there are quite a number of books that are necessarily not in print, but that may give you the option to buy them relatively cheap on the secondhand market. Some of them are like classics that the price goes up quickly, but who give you a full-on breakdown of, say, British bombers from one company, right? And then it's a book like this, and sort of A4 size, and that gives you, if that's what you want to know, like all the British bombers from the period of, say, the First World War to the Second World War. Perfect book to go with. If you are more sort of interested on the conceptual air power side, again, there is for example, in the United States Naval Institute Press, where they probably have a sale right now as well. It's a Christmas sale. Otherwise, you just use Mill AV His for a discount, 25%. They have a lot of books, for example, on the origin of strategic bombing theory, especially the Americans. There we go. Craig Morris's, for example, book is a good one. I would also always, to anybody who wants to read about World War II air power, absolutely encourage you to read Tammy Biddle's Rhetoric and Reality in Second World War air power, something like that, because it just breaks down what people thought air power would do, specifically in strategic terms, in strategic air power terms, and then what it actually did. And that I think that's a really good sort of introduction reading to, if you want to go more into sort of the depth of air power rather than just be on the technical individual level. And yeah, the best recommendation, which I should have really started with, is read what you are interested in. Don't pick up a book just because somebody else says like, oh, this is the must read book, even though I just did that with Tammy Biddle, and it is absolutely a must read book. But read what you're interested in first, and if you have a specific aircraft that you like, even picking up something like an Osprey book can be a good stepping stone to then dig deeper and see where you take that, because you'll very quickly discover like what you're interested in. Are you interested in technology? Are you interested in people? Are you interested in operational stuff? Are you interested in air power? Which I think Justin and me, and Justin, correct me if I'm wrong here on your account, I think we're leaning more towards the latter half of that discussion. We're interested in the technical level to the point where it helps shape sort of the operational level, but I couldn't care less if like a plane had 200 rounds of 20 millimeter ammo or 225 rounds of 20 millimeter ammo. Like that doesn't, on the grand scheme of things, on the operational strategy level, that doesn't matter at all. It may matter in a dogfight here and there, but that's it.
Yeah, I'm very much along those lines. I've spent many years on basically developing an understanding of technical stuff.
Yeah.
So I am definitely well above average in conversing in it, as you are. But I'm definitely not as technical as some people can be. Like even some of the core viewership, like I'm blown away by some of the people, like in the Discord and stuff, that they know so much on the technical stuff. I study it so that I can understand the wider aspects of air power, and then of course, I mean, this is relatively, I brought it up many times before, but my actual core research area is American intelligence assessments of Japanese air and naval power. So one of the things that I set out to differentiate myself from other people who are very good scholars who have written in the same area as me, I really wanted to develop an understanding of the Asia Pacific War, the air war, the naval war, the technology behind it, so that I could understand better what the Americans were trying to assess.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like one weakness of the literature, and again, this isn't me throwing shade, there's a lot of really fantastic scholarship, but one weakness I've identified is that generally speaking, these are intelligence historians who aren't quite as immersed in like specifically Asia Pacific War history, or certainly the war in China, or like the history of Japanese air power, and therefore they leave basically things unexplored in their work that I'd like to fill in one day. And that's kind of how it started for me developing this kind of stuff. I of course have a lot of interest in it as well, which probably helps. But yeah, and as far as like a recommendation from me, I mean, you've kind of like hit the big ones on like the air power side of things. Like if I was gonna pick one, I shill this so much, but it's because it's so good.
Is it
Specifically
Clarenbolt?
for the development of Japanese aviation, it's Wings for the
Yes.
Rising Sun.
Yes.
Um, it's just like a nice single volume developmental history of Japanese air power from basically the 19th century up until 1945, with a little chapter that goes beyond that. Most of it is interwar and World War II, and it's really damn good. And it just gives, it gets a little bit into air mindedness and a little bit on the air power theory side, not too much though. It's more probably like a technical developmental history. That's very good. And then the other, just to pick one other one, Again, related specifically to the Japanese, would be Sunburst by Mark Peaty, which is specifically on the Japanese Navy Air Service. This is only an interwar history with a little concluding chapter touching on some stuff during the Asia Pacific War, but it's got lots of fantastic stuff. Unfortunately, there's no equivalent for the Army, but for the Navy, we do have that. And I believe it's still in print, as far as I know.
And those sort of books are always very good because they explain to you how the Air Force that you know so much about actually became the Air Force that you know so much about, which I think is something that is critically undervalued in a lot of discussions that I see on the internet, because people always assume that, oh, this country won or this country did better in that operation, hence everything they did and all their equipment was better. But that's not necessarily the case, because all countries develop their force to fulfill specific roles in the way they want to fight. So the Germans would build a different air force to the Brits, and the Japanese would build a different air force to the Americans, and the Americans would build a different air force to, I don't know, Canada, right? It's just you have different needs as different countries, because the way you want to fight your war and the way you can actually construct an air force, from your manpower pool over to your industrial capacity and so on and so forth, is completely different. So those sort of books are really important. So, for example, for the Luftwaffe side, Homtz's what is it again? Arming the Luftwaffe is really good in explaining that. Of course, Corum's book, the Luftwaffe, the Creation of the Operational Air War, is very good. Oh yeah, there we have it. Fantastic. And then I should have a ready rack of these books. Sadly, they're all in the other room. What is else? Tools actually are on the Luftwaffe, and it's war crimes as well as like the industrial base behind it. Really interesting, Adam Tooze, to read that, because I believe he's an economist by trade, so he looks at it in a somewhat different terms, and has very illuminating sort of conclusions from that. So Wings of the Rising Sun is written by Meltzer.
Yeah, Jürgen Meltzer,
Jürgen
German
Meltzer.
guy, so I'm sure I consistently butcher his name. But...
No, yeah, you pronounce it well. So yeah, there we go. And also, what I liked from your answer there is, if you're going with the more professional angle, like filling the niche that you want to be known for as a professional is very important. Like, it's a little bit easier for me, I would say, compared to you, because a lot of people write about the Pacific War still, especially in America. So you need to find a specific niche. A surprising lack of historians doing Luftwaffe stuff by now. On the top of my head, I can think about 5 people, and that I mean, there's many reasons to that, but yeah, I always find it fascinating. So for me, the Luftwaffe is a bit more broader, and I can go into individual segments, and hopefully in the future at some point build up a larger piece of work that explains the Luftwaffe. But yeah, so in next year, for those that are in the chat, I've talked about this before, there's going to be a book on close air support, and also the book that is or the Panzer Conference articles sort of compendium has recently been translated, and we're probably going to bring that out, hopefully, knock wood, Q1 next year in English. So that also is going to include my close air support structures chapter. Now, Albin asks, more F-35 or collab with Sweden and Gripen E for Canada? As a Swede, I would like the Gripen E to get a chance to prove itself more. Well, I can understand your proclivity as a Swede towards the Gripen E, and it's a fantastic aircraft. So I on the main channel, for those that don't know, I have pivoted primarily to World War II. I do have a second channel. It's called Airpower 21st Century, where once I have a little bit more time, which is going to come Q1 next year, I will upload more on contemporary stuff. The only thing that I will say now on the Canada stuff is the discussion in Canada is not a capability discussion right now. It's a domestic political discussion, and that's all you sort of need to know about what's going on there, in my opinion. But hey, let the Canadian educate me on that.
Yeah, so I am not by any stretch of the imagination an expert on Canadian procurement. I'm just a Canadian who's moderately informed.
No. This means that you are an expert. You live in that
I'm
country, so you know
definitely
everything about it.
everything. Yeah, take
Also, all the
everything I say
classified
deadly seriously.
internal stuff. You know all of it. It's just like fused into your brain on a daily basis, like a plugin.
So this is a saga that's gone back. I mean, at this point, I mean, I don't even know when this started. Like decades, a couple
Two,
decades at
close
least.
to 2 decades, maybe.
Yeah, and this is not a new thing. So I can't remember the name of the book, but there was an entire history written on how long it took Canada to procure the Leopard 1, for example, as their battle tank back in the what is the 70s.
Mm.
Um, so this is like a long running thing with Canadian procurement. That stuff is just drawn out for ages and ages and goes back and forth, and it's so many different factors. I mean, for one thing, the Canadian public is not very national defense minded. Um, in my opinion, basically, because of our geographic location for many decades, the public has been able to just like not think about it. And usually, when a government wants to make savings or anything like that, one of the first things they go to is they just cut defense spending because no one cares. Um, and so discussions around procurement and things like that, it usually comes down to very superficial looking at price tags, usually
Mm.
upfront price tags, and people get angry that how dare you spend any money on any military stuff. Um, that's shifted recently, given the political climate right now in the with the United States and all that. So there's definitely, I think, more of a push for infusing the military with money. Um, Certainly that I've seen basically my entire life, because I was born basically right. The Cold War was ending right when I was born, so pretty much my entire life it was a story of cuts and neglect for
Mm.
defense. And it's very weird seeing this very recent shift and a large infusion of money into the defense industry. Um, as far as like my personal opinion on if it should be F-35 or Gripen, I know CBC recently did some really interesting coverage. They showed like the full 2021 report, like from the competition, and it was frankly a blowout for the F-35. Like its marks were way higher in capability and all that. But as Chris mentioned, this is not so much about the capability. It's about the fact that the United States is no longer viewed as a reliable partner. So that's like certainly a factor. There is also the issue of um, again, like upfront costs. There's a very strong perception among, I think, laymen that in particular they just assume the F-35 is way more money. Whereas it's actually a little bit more debatable because then you'd be going with a mixed fleet route, and of course there's increased costs going mixed fleet. And the reason why we would be going mixed fleet is because we're kind of already in it for at least I can't remember the exact number, but a handful of F-35s are going to be delivered.
Mm.
Um, so it's a question of mixed fleet versus going all F-35. Um, I can see arguments for both sides basically. And that's not even me just fence sitting because I'm an intellectual coward. I mean, like, I can actually see the positions on either side of it, and it's going to be interesting to see if where the government ends up landing. Um, Again, it's gone on. The saga has gone on so long that it's not even a single party issue. It's like so Canada federally tends to just trade places between the liberals and conservatives every 5-10 years, whatever. Um, and they've both had their hands in this, and they both flopped back and forth about it, and there's not really going to be any end in sight. So, and we are coming up on. I don't know the exact like time window, but we are pretty much right up against the CF-18s basically can't fly anymore. We're starting to reach that end of life, so a
Yeah.
decision is gonna have to be made sooner rather than later. We've kicked the can as much as it can be kicked. So
Yeah, and actually on that note, on kicking the can, on the channel, I some time ago did an interview with a Canadian expert who sort of lives and breathes contemporary air power issues, Richard Chimuka from the
mm,
McLauria Institute. I believe he's still there, but I'm not quite sure. Anyway, I'm going to put that in the chat now. Mind you, it's a slightly older video, so it doesn't include the present discussion, but it's basically an hour-long breakdown on how Canada got to choosing the F-35 on the last selection that happened. and not this one. Or if there's a change, we don't know. And I think that gives you, as somebody who's perhaps interested in this subject but isn't quite sure of all the details and what has happened with the F-35 program over all this time, and Canada's position in it, which was a very good one initially. I think a good breakdown and a perspective on that, and then of course conduct your own sort of research on top of that, and draw your own conclusions there. But yeah, it's an incredibly complex issue. I would, even if I look at it right now, I would only scratch the surface as somebody who, quite honestly, at the end of the day, what Canada flies is not necessarily on my palette of interest. It's generally interest in terms of like the alliance, but beyond that, I'm more immediately concerned what is happening in Europe. But that's just me, right? The old tested ignoring military until you can't. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we're in some ways in a similar time period right now, but I do find myself, as I look at this issue more and more, kind of coming to the conclusion that in the interwar period, especially towards the latter end of the interwar, a lot of countries were starting to do the right thing. They were starting to spend more money, but they were constrained basically by the fact that their capacity wasn't there initially, from the people you hire, the industrial capacity, the resource bottlenecks, and so on and so forth. Where do you send, your precious metals, your precious woods, and so on and so forth? And where does your military spending and building up that capacity interfere with your economic baseline that provides sort of prosperity that your nation has at the time? And because if you push in, if you're in peacetime and you push too much into the military spending aspect, and you go into sort of a war economy that is so obvious because a war has then happened, like from perspective of hindsight here, with the benefit of hindsight, then you're really eroding your country's ability in the long run to compete on the economic market with a lot of other nations. So it's yeah, it's interesting that the sort of parallels. And if you look sort of at Britain in the 1930s, a lot of stuff happens in the background, building up a whole shadow industry and so on, that is, perhaps, I'm not an economist, but perhaps done more or less to the extent of what was feasible at the time and politically viable at the time. Because remember, even though it's so obvious in hindsight, there are so many barriers, civilian to military, and just pure the pure physics of economics that gets in the way, that it's not just that easy of saying like, oh, by 1945 everything should have been gone into military spending. Yeah, if you do that, then your country is probably in a really bad spot by 1940, because economically you're left behind all the other countries. It's always a balance, and that's why it's always good to have a solid military infrastructure that you don't just cut away at the foundations with every single budget, which is basically the trajectory that we had since the peace dividend, and that is now being retrified, and it's going to start paying dividends by the 2030s. But it's tough going for now. All right, so the discussion has immediately gone into the contemporary subjects, which I understand, but we will maybe steer away from those for now, because that is not necessarily what we want to have the channel focusing on right now. However, Calvin Fowler says people unfairly blame Chamberlain despite him setting in motion rearmaments after Munich with regards to the Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy and the shadow factories. Exactly. I mean, Chamberlain is a interesting character, and mind you, I have not necessarily read in depth on him. I think towards the latter half of his government, what is being done by the government at that point is a lot better than in the first half. But the question is, of course, would somebody else in that position have really done something differently, which goes into a what if scenario, which again we don't really touch. Any takes on Chamberlain, Justin, as a proud Commonwealth aficionado?
I'm honestly not super well read, but I know, like, I am dimly aware that I know the historiography is a bit kinder to him as far as rearmament goes than certainly popular perception. Like, he's kind of the the byword for cowardly appeasement in kind of like the popular mind, but I know on the among the historians, there's been quite a level of nuance applied to Chamberlain, and that he did set a lot of groundwork for rearmament.
That is also a more recent trend. I want to say in the
Mhm.
last 20 sort of years,
Yeah, something like that.
because I mean, obviously it goes here in Britain. It goes into the whole sort of ethos of the Second World War and the popular memory. And there it's just like Churchill was the man, right? Who prevented this country from falling to the Nazis. And as much as that is true, that automatically sort of implies that what he's done is correct on every level, and what has been done previously by all these governments that had not prepared or in apostrophes, not prepared the country for war, was done wrong, which I think, thankfully, we have moved away from in the historiography. But as always, sort of, it's catch up, right? So the academic circles are sort of 5 to 10 years ahead of the popular histories that are being written in most cases, not in all cases, but in most cases. And then sort of the documentaries that are being made are another 10 years, take another 10 years to catch up to that. So it's almost like a generational shift that has to happen in order to for the record to be corrected. And then by the time in the popular history it's been corrected, it's probably out of date again.
Oh, there's actually some really good questions on like
Okay.
flight sim stuff and energy fighting that actually is
Okay.
really interesting.
How do you think
Um,
flight simulator environment, i.e., War Thunder, DCS, IO2, end up informing the popular perception of what energy fight? Oh, that's a good
it's
question.
really good.
That is good question. Oh my god, if I had a dime of people, like every time people tell me, oh, like I've done it in IO2, so it must have been like that in World War II. Ah, you go first. I took the
Okay.
last ones
Yeah.
first.
So my um, this is really great. So I've definitely seen it. I think I'm of the opinion that overall, I think like the rise of flight sims like DCS or more casual ones like War Thunder, or I mean even Battlefield, like on the really arcadey end, like that's extreme arcadey, but it's like
Yeah,
games drawing attention to air combat.
yeah.
I think has been generally a net good. Particularly on like the War Thunder to DCS side of things, where for one thing, with companies like Gaijin and Wargaming as well, they tend to infuse cash for researchers to go look at things that otherwise wouldn't get researched. So I know there's been so much great work done by independent researchers who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford to go to an archive, but like Gaijin's paying for it or whatever, and they find all sorts of really interesting stuff about tanks or ships or aircraft. Um, so I think that's been great, and just people just learning about planes more, gaining interest in planes, because we can always like scoff at silly stuff, but like my earliest origins for getting into history and then eventually doing it pretty seriously was like trashy daytime documentaries that were probably
Mm,
garbage. I don't really have the clearest memory of them, but I just remember I'd turn on whatever channel and be like, hey, it's a World War II documentary. I'm sure it was bad, but that's what got me into this.
yeah.
Um, and games can have that same thing. Now, specifically for the energy fighting, I think it definitely can. Like, it could develop certain understanding of the dynamics of air combat when it comes to
Mm,
energy fighting. I guess one interesting thing is that, like, probably the average War Thunder player has a better understanding of energy fighting than World War II pilots would have, because my understanding is the science of that. So it was more of an what I'm talking about is more of it was more of an art during the Second World War. Like there was understanding, but as far as I know, the
mm,
calculations and things are a little more. There's a little bit more uncertainty around it. I want to say the RAF did some stuff like in 1940, actually mathing out certain like energy versus maneuver.
mm,
Um, there's awareness of it. Um, One thing that I note is because of the nature of something like, let's say, War Thunder ARB match, because of your objective, you're locked into I don't know, a 15-minute match of War Thunder, and your objective is basically shoot down enemy planes.
mm,
It teaches people to take fights that in real life you would never want to take,
yeah.
because in real life you have the option to just not fight it. So
Provided you have the
that's
performance and you're in the position where you can disengage. But yes.
yeah, like so one great example that's stuck in my mind from like a IRRB match I played a few months ago was I was in a P40E and I was climbing out from the airfield and it had come down to a one-on-one against an A6M2. So kind of a classic matchup historically speaking, which is kind of cool. But I was stuck climbing out in a P40E. The A6M2 was like right above me. Basically, it was over. I could try to fight, but he could do basically anything. And in the reality, like in real life, what I would do is just, well, I'm going home. Like it's not happening today, but in that match, I had to go out and actually try and fight it. So that can create, I think, certain misconceptions about the dynamics of air combat in real life. I know Joe Foss, who's a fighter pilot that fought in the South Pacific. I mean, he has a quote that's basically boils down to it's like if I was flying around in my Wildcat and I saw Zero on the same altitude, like same energy state as me, I would just go home. Like, why would you take that fight?
Yeah.
Like, that's very stupid. War Thunder, you'd want to take that fight because that's the objective of the video game.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting. Another thing specifically related to energy fighting is specifically for hit and run. Um, a lot of time, historically speaking, in the South Pacific, hit and run was literally hit and run. It was not
Yeah.
trying to like make sequential passes and reclimb and try to reattack. It was like you fly through the Japanese formation, you shoot up what you can, and you are gone. You do not stick around at all, which is generally also not something you can do in War Thunder because again, you're in a match, you're in a box, and you have to shoot them down. So you can't really run forever. People get annoyed if you run forever. um, so I think that's like an interesting dynamic that can result
Yeah. No,
from that.
definitely. I mean, basically building from what you said. First of all, the interest that video games generate in the topic is great, and I know from various museums that I've worked with, especially in the tank community, is that the video games have been a massive cause for people to come through those doors, to have an interest in the subject area, and also to have knowledge in that area. Now, mind you, a lot of that knowledge is exactly sort of that technical knowledge we were talking about earlier in our conversation, but it also goes into tactical, and to a point, depending on what the interests of people are, they then also go into the operational aspects, right? And they really enjoy talking about those sort of things. So video game can absolutely be a catalyst to interest, and that it benefits basically everybody in the history scene. Now, sadly, for aircraft, there has not been a similar success story as World of Tanks has for the tank
That's fair.
community. Mainly, I think, because air combat is, I don't want to say it more complex, but it's perhaps a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more, yeah, it is more complex, I would say, in some ways than like tanks, where it's just like a death match. Because with aircraft, you can, for example, what I want to get point at is you can see on the reaction of in War Thunder, for example, of how a player fights, whether they're good or bad, basically within their first maneuver. With World of Tanks, and I've played a lot of World of Tanks back in the day, and I was fairly good at it. It was a lot more opaque. Now, I don't know how that translates to the actual environment that we're talking about in terms of war. Um, but I think it hints at why perhaps flight simulators, even the more arcadey ones like War Thunder, do not have that same player base. And even in War Thunder, a lot of people have transitioned to ground RB rather than ARB, from my understanding. So yeah. The other element is like we completely forget about the human element in this, to the point of you, hey, I could just fly away. Even in simulators like DCS and IL2, when I was flying them very consistently, I've thousands of hours in those games. I was taking fights sometimes because I was like, whatever, I can just do it. And it's a video game. I get shut down. Okay, whatever. Control E, eject, and fly another sortie with another plane straight from the airfield. Now, in reality, that doesn't happen. There is a way around that with some mechanics, like you can fly again for 24 hours, but that's on very specialized servers and within very specialized communities. Does not work for the average player. Beyond that, I think, to your point of experience of how the understanding of air combat, because you don't die in virtual lives, the average player will probably have, and there's no good way to phrase this, they will not have more flight experience than an actual pilot, because the actual pilot actually has a pilot license and flight experience. But in terms of things like accuracy, like gunnery, they will probably, if you have like 4, 5, 600 hours in a flight simulator, you will probably be more accurate than quite a number of pilots in real life. Now, a lot of this is because of physics and the way that an aircraft moves in real space and how you interact with it over to a video game. Well, things are a lot more clinical. But I think that creates an inflation in our minds of how easy it is to shoot aircraft down. And that then goes also into the arcadey nature of, hey, a single 3-hour match in IL-2 Great Battles, more planes will be shot down in those 3 hours than sometimes among days on entire front lines during World War II. Simply because it's it's the purpose is, here are some objectives on the map, fight around them, right? It creates a cluster of chaos where you can go in, shoot a couple of planes down, bug out. So I think that warps the perceptions quite a bit. And then what I've also seen with the player base in especially IL-2 Great Battles is some of them fly more the way they think air combat was in World War II than it actually was. So specifically, I'm looking here at the player base that flies the German aircraft. The amount of time back when I was flying with my old squadron buddies, when I was flying Germans or Soviets in IL-2 Great Battles, for example, like most of the dogfights happen between ground level and 300 meters, so 9,000 feet roughly. But the amount of times when I would just look up and I would see 4 Bf 109s flying in perfect finger 4 formation above me, circling at 7,000 feet, doing absolutely nothing, right? To help the objective or to help the purpose of the game. And then you would press them on it, and then they would be like, oh, because German planes are better at altitude and we are doing what the Luftwaffe did. It's like, you have not read a single experience or combat report from the Second World War on the Eastern Front, because the Luftwaffe was absolutely forced to go down in altitude, because that's where the combat was. You cannot go at higher altitude at 6,000 meters, 7,000 meters and just expect the Soviets to go there if the air support is happening at between ground level and 1,000 meters. That's where the fight is. So I think, again, it's sometimes it can create those elements where I think our perspective on World War II influences the way people engage with a flight simulators, and then the way they engage with a flight simulator influences their perception of World War II, and that's where things start to become a bit of an issue. But in order to generate interest in the subject, hey, I love it, and I'm really happy for a lot of history museums, also in the aviation space, that have so many more people coming through the doors now and saying, hey, I saw this in War Thunder, I saw this in World of Tanks, I'm flying in this aircraft, in this Spitfire in IL-2 Cliffs of Dover. And also at a far lower age than it used to be. Because museums about 10 to 15 years ago, had a real problem with the old guard, the people that would come religiously once a month into the exhibition space where they know basically everything. They were dying off, and there was no backfill with young people, and that has changed, which is very nice to see. And yes, that means that some of the exhibitions become different and they are more approachable, they're more visual, they're more flashy, they're less stuff, but it's all for the greater good of actually getting people through those doors and engaging with history, which is what we want. Anyway,
Yep.
That is your answer, Justin. That is my answer.
Yeah.
I think we've done that in great detail.
One thing I'll add is one thing I can always point to as an example, because more people have obviously played War Thunder than flown around in real air combat, believe it or not.
We don't have any real combat experience.
Oh yeah, actually, not at all.
Like, but, honestly, the question, really, sorry to interrupt there, but the question really should go to people who fly DCS but are like Air Force pilots, because I think they can give a very nuanced answer, and a lot of them have already done that on YouTube, where they say like, hey, certain things translate really well, other things don't translate at all. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, over to you.
Yeah, my final thing is that like almost every single time, like I would say 95% of the time I am shot down in War Thunder, I was shot down by somebody I didn't see. Even though I'm flying in third person and they've got a big red name tag and they've got a dot over them and all these arcadey things helping me, and it's still the same dynamic to what it is historically. I was flying along, and then I explode,
Yeah.
and I'm like, what was that?
That's actually a good point, as sort of an annex of what I said. Situational awareness. The situational awareness you have in a simulator is, in my opinion, even in a good simulator like DCS, or like a high-end simulator like IL2 Great Battles and then DCS, is better than in real life. Now there are certain conditions where that maybe doesn't apply. Like if you have, a PPL and you go flying on the weekend, you yourself will also be looking around for aircraft in the area and spotting them, sometimes from far ranges, sometimes not at all. And weather and the meteorological conditions that have a massive factor there. But yeah, situational awareness on a general level is far higher, which again may tinge the way we think about World War II aviation, where it's exactly like you said. Most people were probably shot down by somebody they never saw coming. Um, it's a and if you read a lot of the writing from pilots from World War II, you get that sense, and you don't get that sense when they talk about themselves being shot at. Some of them are very very upfront about it and said like, oh, suddenly I got hit and I don't know from what. Some of them are a bit more like, oh, I saw him coming and then I did this maneuver but didn't work, blah 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 blah. Where I'm just like, yeah, that could have happened, and maybe you're just inflating it a bit. But when you talk, when you hear them talk about the people they have shot down, is almost all of them, like Per Klosterman's Big Show, Wing Leader by Johnson, Thunderbolt by the under Johnson. Read those books and just go through all the air kills and see what they tell you about the defensive maneuvers of the other aircraft. And most of the time, there aren't any. So sure, okay, maybe a bit of narrative flair in the writing as well. But I think on average, across many different memoirs, that is a trend that is interesting to observe. Right. Let's answer another question in the chat, and then I think we should, or rather, I will give you a little bit of an overview of Unternehmen F, Operation F, that the Germans did in the Netherlands, in the attack on Netherlands, as an annex to one of the previous videos that came out this week. So, question here. Speaking of gunnery, or rather, statement in the beginning, it is common said that the US Navy had a large advantage in deflection shooting. What is the evidence of this, and how does it actually compare to other air forces or the United States Army Air Force or Corps, depending on what year we
Yes, I
talk
know where
about?
this argument is from. I want to say the main proponent of it is still John Lundstrom in his first team series. Um,
Yeah.
so, and he makes it, he does have a very strong argument. Now, I can't remember the nuance of it. I want to say that he claims, and I honestly don't know if this is true either, he claims that the US Navy was the only one to specifically train its pilots in deflection shooting, at least pre war. I can't remember if he gets into the war itself. Um, he also notes that the Japanese Navy did practice deflection shooting, but not to the same degree that the US Navy did. Um, and then if you read his accounts through the first team, you can get a very strong understanding that like these U.S. Navy pilots in their Wildcats were very proficient at deflection shooting. A lot of the description of the combat, you're looking at, yeah, like 90-degree deflection shots and things like that. So how that compares, at least I can comment at least a little bit on the Japanese side, is again, the Japanese Navy was doing some of its own deflection shooting, but definitely not to the same degree as the US Navy. Um, I actually don't know about the Army off the top of my head, the Japanese Army or the US Army, how that was, because I'm thinking back to like descriptions of US Army combat against the Japanese. And I can't recall if like there's enough detail for me to tell if they were doing more like a comparable amount of deflection shooting to the US Navy. Um, it might be a bit less, but it also could just be a source issue. Like if anyone has ever read John Lundstrom's books, which I highly recommend, he has such a way of methodically piecing together the air combat, and a way of describing it that makes it very clear in a way that, because it's really hard to do in a way that other authors might not be as good at, or potentially their sourcing is just not robust enough to allow them to do that the same way that John Lundstrom does with his accounts. Because sometimes you're just limited by what you have. Um, But yeah, that's my 2 cents on it. I really can't comment at all for the RAF or the Luftwaffe or anything like that. So take it away, Chris.
Yeah, so very good question, actually, because from what I know, very little sourcing on this. So I have looked at the RAF, and there are some gunnery manuals from the RAF. Interestingly, I have not yet found a gunnery manual for the Luftwaffe.
Interesting.
I haven't. I have also not found a detailed. I found like sort of a summary, but I have not found a detailed breakdown of the Jagdfliegerschulen, so the schools, the operational training squadrons, basically in modern terms, or the OCUs rather. In modern terms, operational training squadrons back in the day in World War II. That would be the RAF equivalent. So the Jagdfliegerschulen must have had a curriculum which included gunnery. I have not yet found that. So definitely something to look at in the future. I want to say that there is sufficient evidence from World War II that basically every service did target towing, which allows you to do gunnery training. But from what I know, for example, in the Army Air Corps / Army Air Force, that was greatly expanded as the training program was ramped up during World War II, following 1941. And I'm going to assume that it's similar in the RAF and all sort of the Commonwealth training schools that were, for example, also in Canada, where they gave them more chances to use their guns and start leading a target and so on and so forth. Then again, the average gunnery skill during World War II is probably fairly low. There are some people who did it really well, like Hans-Joachim Marseille for the Germans, and what's that British ace who had all these kills at a high deflection angle to the point where they didn't even see the aircraft? Like they would pull into the aircraft and then they would overpull by a god knows what both margin and just fire, and then the plane just boom. It's like similar to Hans-Joachim Marseille. Like some people just have that innate ability to calculate in a 3D space and have that intuition where they just can say, okay, so 3, 2, 1, bang, and they get that kill. I can't remember. I think he was shot down, and it wasn't Bader. Sorry. It was somebody else, and I believe he was shot down in the Mediterranean in 1943. But he was one of the best shots out there. Also had a distinct problematic personality, which for fighter aces seems to be going hand in hand with a lot of the success they have. Not all of them, of course, but quite a few fighter aces from the First World War over to the Second World War had the successful ones. Quite a few of them had very difficult relationships with their squadron mates and so on and so forth, because they were just peculiar characters, let's say. I sadly don't remember his name. It wasn't Bader. It'll come to me maybe. Maybe somebody in the chat knows. Right. Shall I take it away with Unternehmen F?
Yeah, sure.
So right in the future chat, just so you know, Justin and I are taking recommendations or sort of feedback on stream. So let us know what sort of works for you and what doesn't, what you want to see. And the idea is right now also that in the future we'll pick up sort of 1 or 2 topics and talk about them in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to trial run something at this point and see how where it takes us. And for this, I actually need to share my screen, because we're going to return to our good friend Google Maps. And I say that as, do you see that, Justin?
Yeah.
Okay, let me see if I can somehow can this program please work the way it's supposed to work? There we go. Okay, so you're big, you're small, I'm small, the screen is big. Okay, just as everybody is getting settled, let me see. Let's do it this way. Yeah. So this is going to be a trial run of this sort of concept. So we're going to do it very easy with Google Maps without any sort of flashy animations. I am absolutely aware that the borders that are painted in right now are the borders from 2025. As such, they are not representative of the 1940 borders. However, they are broadly similar. And what I want to talk about is Unternehmen F, also known as Unternehmen Festung, Operation Fortress, and that is the German air landing operations against the Netherlands in order to knock it out of the war, which Germany starts going west in 1940. And obviously, the Netherlands was neutral in order to then deny this area, and specifically Fortress Holland, which is sort of the area that if we look at the... my scroll wheel isn't working properly. Fortress Holland is basically the area south of Rotterdam in Holland's Diep, and then following the rivers up towards roughly, where's my geography skills failing me here, to the Markenmeer. So this area is Fortress Holland with a lot of airports. There's roughly 3-4 airports around The Hague. There's 2 airports around Rotterdam. There's an airport including Schiphol next to Amsterdam. And there's a couple of airports over here as well, which the Germans and specifically the Luftwaffe feared would be used by the RAF in any sort of future engagement. And as such, they wanted to deny the space from Britain. Also, potentially deny the ability of Britain to send troops this way, and then, endanger the Ruhr as well as northern Germany. The Ruhr, of course, here being the area where a lot of manufacturing capacity was for the Germans, and also a lot of raw resource extraction was. And as you will know from the video that I did, although Germany gets control of the Netherlands, and although Germany is able to occupy it for most of the war until 1944, give or take, and 1945 as well, I think some northern areas, what ends up happening is that because this area is then under occupation, the Brits and the Americans can launch direct attacks against Germany because they do not have to worry about Dutch neutrality. Now, Unternehmen F, as part of the Dutch component, was an air landing operation involving the 7th Fliegerdivision, which had roughly 4,500 men in 2 regiments, and those were the Fallschirmjägers. And then you had also the 22nd Luftlandedivision, which had about 12,000 men. And a lot of this was set aside for this attack. I will absolutely acknowledge, of course, that there were also air landing operations in Belgium, for example, in this area around Maastricht, between Maastricht and Liège, specifically taking a couple of the bridges that you can see here, the Kana Bridge, the Vroonhoven Bridge, as well as the Veldwetzel, something like that, a bridge here. And of course, the fort of Eben Emael. However, not something we are going to discuss in this little operational analysis. The biggest emphasis that the Germans have for the air landing operation is take control of the bridge at Moerdijk, take control of the bridge in Dordrecht, and take control of the bridge specifically here. Of course, this is the modern map, so there's a couple of more bridges, but specifically this area here in Rotterdam, because that will enable the 18th Army, specifically the 9th Panzer Division, to then run up this area, make those crossings, and then hit the capital of Den Haag. However, next to this objective, the second objective was to take control of Den Haag and take control of the Dutch government, as well as basically take the royalty hostage as well. And for this, there were 3 air landing operations happening around Den Haag, one to the south, which is now built up, one to the east, again, a bit more built up now, and one to the northeast, also built up now. And this, mind you, as a German, I'm not supposed to be able to pronounce this, but it is called Scheveningen. I know how to pronounce the city. Thank you very much. Now, what I can tell you already is that this operation here at Den Haag was an absolute nightmare for the Germans. and resulted in a complete and utter failure. The bridges into Rotterdam, those missions were successful. However, they were basically on a shoestring by day 3, and that's when the Germans then also take the decision to bomb Rotterdam, which I will go into a bit more detail soon. Most of the planes that attack the Netherlands fly initially from the north of Germany. I'm specifically talking about the bomber formations right now. Fly out into the North Sea, fly in parallel to the coastline, pretending to have do a raid on England, so the Netherlands doesn't understand what is going on, and then move south and then hit them at low altitude, all the airports that are found in Fortress Holland. However, they are spotted when doing this, and they're even fired upon by a Dutch Navy ship that observes a couple of German planes laying mines in this area. But overall, they achieve a level of surprise in quite a few of the airports and then are able to destroy a number of them. However, not all of them. So there is a little bit of air activity still going on throughout these couple of days in when was this? May, the Maydagen, as they're known in the Netherlands, but very little on the Dutch side. Anyway, let's just assume for now, for the purposes of this video, that the Dutch Air Force is completely suppressed. That is not necessarily the case, but for the purpose of the video, that is good enough. In Den Haag, the 3 different air landing operations are, I mean, they're a failure in terms of intelligence. They're mainly an intelligence failure, right? So one of them, the one, let me just quickly consult my notes. The one at Ockenburg lands fairly close to a garrison of Dutch grenadiers. So they have their fight cut out for them, and they're basically pinned down in the area where they've landed. The operation in Valkenburg, the planes that land there can land. However, it transpires that the airfield has not been prepared for big planes to land there, as the ground is very soft. It hasn't been hardened yet, and as such, a lot of these planes just sink in the mud and can't be moved away from the airstrip, so it's completely congested and cannot then be used anymore for additional reinforcements. Whereas the attack on Yppenburg is a failure because the Luftwaffe attack previously does not destroy the anti-aircraft defenses there, so as the German Ju-52s touch down, they are taken under fire by the Dutch anti-aircraft guns, and that's pretty bad for them. What then happens is that a lot of supplies and additional reinforcements that are sent in cannot land at these 3 sites, and they have to use, especially here in Ockenburg, the beach. And while that allows the Germans to get boots on the ground, a lot of these planes then are lost. And a lot of the planes, the Ju-52s in this area, will never fly again because they're either destroyed on the ground or they're unserviceable after landing. Moving to Rotterdam, where, as well as the Moerdijk and sort of Zwijndrecht here, the Dordrecht, the bridges there. Now, these are taken control by the Germans with relative ease, although there is a lot of fighting in Dordrecht, and the positions that the Germans have there are ever more precarious before reinforcements are rushed in by 9th Panzers. Interestingly, the landings in Rotterdam are free-falled, mainly free-falled. There was an airport here where you see Walhaven back in the day. So that's the main airport that the Germans use to land reinforcements. They also land a lot of, well, no, I say a lot, about 100 paratroopers here at Weidenoord at the stadium. And then they race down to take control of the bridges of the Northern Island, as well as landing a couple of paratroopers on the New Maas with seaplanes in order to take positions there. Now, this becomes ever more precarious as time goes by because, basically the plan to decapitate the Dutch government doesn't work out. So there is way more resistance by the Dutch than expected. And as Dutch reinforcements come in, the airfield of Walhaven is made unserviceable by basically artillery fire. So you can't fly in more reinforcements. And in the end of the day, it's because of this, and because 9th Panzers doesn't actually have the speed that it needs. There are 2 defensive lines that run from about here in Amsterdam down to the south, and that impairs sort of the speed of the German advance. At Breda, or just south of Breda, the Luftwaffe is called in as an emergency measure because there's a French column that actually makes it all the way up here, and then is hit by German Luftwaffe planes, and that forces them to retreat. That could have completely messed up the plan as well if they were able to sort of dig in around this area. So the Germans, by day 3, day 4, are so very much in panic that they know that unless something drastically happens, the Dutch are not going to be capitulating, giving up the fight, whatever, whether it's the city of Rotterdam, whether it's the whole country, that they consider no other option but to bomb Rotterdam to make a statement. And this is also because by the 13th of May, there is a lot of activity now with the Germans, of course. Where is my geography degree leading me? I don't have a degree in geography. I don't know why I said that. Where is Sedan? Where is the favorite German highway into France? Why do I not find Sedan? I should know this in my genes. Okay, well, I will find Sedan with the cheat code. There. Nay. Why is it giving me so many Sedans? Ignore me, chat. Ignore me, chat. Why is it not giving me Sedan? Sedan, here. Okay, I found Sedan. There we go. There is the fortification line. So they're taking, they want to take Sedan. For this, they need a lot of the Luftwaffe forces, specifically the Stukas that are operating in the north. So they're starting to panic, and as such, yeah, they bomb Rotterdam, and the city does get bombed with about half of the force that is being sent against it, because the Luftwaffe fails to cancel it in time. So that gives you sort of an impression of why that happened and why this high-risk, high-reward scenario that they had drawn up nearly failed, and why one of the many terror bombings that the Luftwaffe would conduct happened in 1940. Any questions? Crickets. Justin, you can ask a question as well.
I don't have any questions, sir.
Oh, man, I'm putting you on the spot. Give me a question here.
Where's Saddam?
Let me find it now. Hang on. Let me find it without the cheat code. Brussels. Sedan is right here. Right there. And you know what? Just to make sure that people actually understand that I know this area. So there were 3 crossing points, one here, one there, and one here. And initially the positions on this area here were hit by the Stukas. And it's because the pontoon bridge, I think the first one was built here, because the French, there's this sort of this confusion in the French lines of what actually happens. The French think that as soon as the pontoon bridge is up and as soon as troops are funneling in, that tanks are crossing, so they fall back very quickly to sort of this area here, just north of Chevauche, and that gives the German the opportunity to then cross multiple crossings and build up that tempo, and then race up this area right here towards the channel, while the French counterattack initially rallies, I believe, somewhere around here and wants to go up north via Vadlincourt, but that doesn't actually materialize. So yeah, anyway, that's a little bit of a taster of how we maybe want to do some of the more specialized segments in the future. If you have any questions on that, absolutely fantastic if you do. If not, don't you worry. We can continue with the next subject. Stop sharing.
I want to talk about Tora, but we'll let people Let's see if they have
I
any
need no,
questions
no.
for you.
Honestly, take it away with Tora.
So I is almost an annual tradition. I might miss a year here and there that I watch Tora around this time of year. Oh, see, there's a question. There's a question, Chris.
Where's the question?
How did the Netherlands Air Force survive?
I don't see that question.
Oh, it
Wait,
might take you a second to see it.
wow, it's faster for you. How did the Netherlands Air Force survive? Some planes got in the air on time, and some weren't hit by the Germans. But when I say how did the Netherlands Air Force survive, I mean I can't remember the exact numbers, but there weren't many. There were like two or three bombers that survived the opening strike. Basically, none of the Fokker G, what are they, the G3s, the twin engine one, and a lot of the planes that actually survived were reconnaissance aircraft. Some of the fighters got into air and also had a dogfight and were then shot down, but also did shoot down German aircraft. Yeah, the so it's basically down to luck and having your planes in the air during the opening strike that saved most of them. And they did some interesting attacks. Like some of the reconnaissance aircrafts were also sort of light bombers, and they attacked some German positions and had some moderate success. There were two bombers that attacked, and then eventually, no, there was one bomber that attacked the Moerdijk Bridge. Failed to hit it on its two runs and then got shot down. But that was sort of the last hope for the Dutch to sever that link. But yeah, it's a really interesting sort of time period during the early fighting in World War II. Is there a decisive evidence that the Stukas were more important than the massive artillery concentration at Saison? Excellent question. I think it's a combination of forces. It's the artillery, it's the flak guns that were moved to direct firing lines on the French fortifications. It's the air attack that happens as well. It's you know over something as simple as machine gun fire against points of fortifications. I think it's just that, and it's sort of uh, the French forces that were positioned at Sedan was basically a fortress regiment, or it's like a second tier unit that didn't necessarily have the best equipment, didn't necessarily have the best training, but was expected to hold in fortifications. But suddenly you had like the whole world exploding around them, and they didn't really exactly understand what was going on anymore, and they were under air attack. Which created all sorts of problems. So I think it's more of a combination. It's saying just that the Stukas did everything is a simplification. How strong were the Netherlands AA units? Did they have some good equipment, or were they just usually inadequate stuff? Overall, it was inadequate. The amount of AA units that they had was in clusters around airfields, good enough for point defense at the time, but there wasn't any sort of the sort of immense firepower that you would see later on during the war. And as far as I know, also the Dutch forces didn't have any motorized AA, perhaps a couple of machine guns, but they didn't have any motorized AA. And with that specifically, I don't mean AA that could be towed from A to B, that they certainly had, but AA that was mounted on trucks, which is something that, for example, the Germans had together with towed AA, which allowed them to have units protected during their maneuver. Yeah, anyway, Tora.
Yeah, so I rewatch it once a year usually. I absolutely love it to death. I mean, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. This is the core of the core audience. Everyone loves Tora, I'm sure. But yeah, I am just consistently blown away by it every time I watch it. It's basically timeless. Like it is like history on the history side of things. It is like a near perfect time capsule of our understanding of the attack on Pearl Harbor as it was in like the late 1960s,
Yeah.
up to 1970. The historian Gordon Prang was heavily involved with it. So he's written what is still to this day, like if somebody is like, I want to read one book about the attack on Pearl Harbor, it's At Dawn We Slept by Gordon Prang.
Yeah.
Still. Um, and he was very involved. I think Genda Minoru was a unofficial technical advisor as well. So you got to get this weird case where one of the people who helped plan the actual attack on Pearl Harbor also helped advise for the movie about the attack on Pearl Harbor. Of course, you've got like incredible aircraft stunt work that, while it might not be like technically accurate to like a for the history, you can't really fault any of it because it's real pilots flying real planes in real life. It's kind of beyond criticism that way. Like you can tell they are trying to make it look as good as it possibly can
Mm.
look. With the physical constraints. I could be a lot harder on it if it's like all CG, computer generated stuff, because then it's like it doesn't cost you any extra money to make it look right,
Yeah.
versus not right. Whereas if you're flying real planes around, it's like, yeah, you can't do a 70-degree dive in like a Texan, right? Like it's not going to happen. But it's just incredible from both filmmaking side of things and the history side of things. And we will one day, probably maybe next year, so like a year from now, we might do a live commentary on Tora Tora Tora, because man, that movie has so much to talk about.
I mean, it's much better. I mean, this doesn't have to be said, but it's much better than Pearl Harbor, the movie.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and it's much better than the Pearl Harbor segment in Midway, because oh my,
Mhm.
oh my, yeah, I we've had this discussion with Jonathan Parshow as well, that certain elements in Tora are out of date by now, but it still holds up in many ways, and the intention behind it also still holds up, I think, better than a lot of the more modern takes on it. And it's just seeing it done with real aircraft, and I absolutely understand why nowadays that just cannot be done anymore, with both with the access to aircraft plus the most likely sort of insurance issues and cinematography issues and so on and so forth. Sure, um, modern movies can do other things better, and I am not against actually using CGI to
Mhm.
recreate air combat, because that's basically the only way we can do that nowadays. Dunkirk basically pushed it as far as I have seen in modern days of what you can do with real
With
aircraft. And
real aircraft, yeah.
yeah, you have a fireplace?
Yeah, my decadent North American mansion.
I love fireplaces, man.
Yeah. It just
I'm
kind of
re-
came with the house. I wasn't really looking for one specifically, but it is kind of nice when it's cold.
I love a fireplace. I want a fireplace. Just imagine, like, I can just see myself there in that couch with a nice little tumbler of whiskey, and just in this jumper here, just looking at the fire and be like, "Life's good, man. Life's good." I love that, man. I knew there was a fireplace. I never clocked there was a fire. Like, I've seen that fireplace. I never knew it has fire, and I'm really happy for you, man. That is awesome. Okay, so back to Tora.
There's so much I can say about it, and I think I'll
Yeah.
save a lot of it for like when we just start watching it one day.
Yeah.
But it is just that you can tell that they really cared, like down to
Mm,
every detail. And even when something is technically wrong, it's usually wrong for a reason. Either they are working within the physical constraints of what they could do, or
yeah.
I think one of my favorite little details is Akagi in the movie has the bridge island on the wrong side of the ship. And like at a
Unforgivable.
glance, you're like, oh no, they messed this up. The model has it on the wrong side. It's supposed to be on the port side, but it's on the starboard side. No, that was done intentionally. They built the sets and the model that way because the real aircraft carrier that they were using, which was an Essex class, if memory serves,
Yeah.
has the bridge on the starboard side.
Mm,
So they just decided to swap it for Akagi so that it
yeah.
matches the real aircraft carrier that they actually have access to, because they weren't going to build a fully functional Akagi. they,
They
they did
weren't.
build they did build a near full scale replica of Nagato just to have people stand around on it and talk, which is just a power move, and it just blows me away every time I see it. I always think of the production discussions like, oh man, this full scale battleship mock up. It's like there's gonna be so many awesome action scenes. It's like, Nope, you're gonna have some old men walk around on it and talk to each other.
There is something to be said about movies using actual equipment and being in the actual setting, even if it's rebuilt. Like Das Boot, for example. I think they rebuilt Type 7, or did they use a real? No, I think they rebuilt a Type 7, and also parts of the Type 7s in different studio locations with different effects that could be applied and so on and so forth, and it just makes everything slightly better. It's almost imperceptible, and I wonder if it's just my personal bias of being like, oh yeah, they really tried here. Which is, for example, one of the reasons why I actually like Dunkirk as a movie,
Yeah.
like the air scenes in Dunkirk, because I understand for people who have seen, I don't know, Battle of Britain or Tora Tora Tora, and then more modern takes like Red Tails. Oh my god. Like it's boring, the air combat in like, show a little trick alert. Oh, come on, it's like, oh yeah, guy takes 30 millimeter MK108s to the face, like, and like lives to tell the tale. Give me a break, Spielberg. I think it's Spielberg, right? Red Tails.
That one was like George Lucas and somebody.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
George Lucas, so maybe that's why I had the Spielberg connection. Anyway, uh, so for example, in Dunkirk, they did a lot of stuff inside cockpits that made a lot of sense and showed people interacting with the aircraft, and even talk about things like fuel efficiency and like keeping enough fuel to go on the way home as you're covering the landing, sort of the evacuation zone. And I really like that, which I then very easily can omit the less involved air combat side of things, because yeah, you're using real machines, and then it's the 2020s, or when did Dunkirk come out? It came out
2017,
teen. Yeah. Oh my god, I'm
somewhere
getting
around
old.
there.
It feels like yesterday, but yeah.
Yeah, we're
But
getting
yeah,
old
like
now, so time doesn't
yeah.
matter.
It's just at that time, it's like you're not going to get the same permissions for
Yeah.
cinematography as you did back when Battle of Britain was done.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Uh, Red Tails. Oh my god.
Yeah, that's
Like
that's an example of one where like you don't have the excuse because you have computer generated effects that you can do
yeah.
pretty much anything you want. Um, in that case, my bar does go up. It's like, okay, you can actually be pretty accurate, like with scale and things like that, because when you're sending it to these artists, it costs the same to get it right versus not right. It's just if you care.
Yeah.
Like a good example is that recent Midway movie where some of the shots were pretty good, some of the effect shots, and other effect shots were laughably bad, like where you just have like a wide shot of the fleet and there's like 6 Yamato class battleships there for some reason. And it's like, I'm not going to fault the artists for that. That's somebody above the artists not caring enough to tell them, hey, you need to
Yeah.
use these different models that they have made for the movie, um, and insert it into the correct shot. Um,
I wonder
I'm,
if that's just a thing of, hey, we need to show a fleet information, and that's the old problem of, like, a task force is big geographically speaking. The ships are dispersed on a wide area, and even with a wide shot, you're going to see in real terms maybe 2 3 ships. Like, look at some of those pictures from that time when you had somebody on one ship taking a picture of another ship. There's nothing else there because they're strung out in such a way that they it's not the same in the movie, but in the movie you have to show this is a task force and they have powerful machines and they're steaming down towards Pearl Harbor. And if you have a couple of aircraft carrier there, and then a couple of, I assume, like heavy cruisers, light cruisers. I actually don't know the composition of on the target side of things, on the boat side of things. Um, and then the destroyers, they fade sort of in the background with these little tiny boats. Whereas if you have the 6 Yamato class battleships, it's like, oh, they're
you can
big, they're
see them.
powerful. I can see them. It's look at the size of the guns on those things.
Oh,
It's yeah.
the gold standard for it is like whenever I see somebody try to make the argument that more realistic looking air combat wouldn't look good on film, I always think of someone, a Japanese gentleman many years ago did all of these animations for like certain air actions in the Pacific, just on his own, like in 2008 or something.
Yeah.
Um, and he had such a methodical attention to detail to how planes fly and how they act in formation and all of this stuff. And what's so interesting about it is he's not just doing like a hyper realistic take on it, he's approaching it like a filmmaker would. So it's shot and edited to be exciting. Um, and those animations look so good. And if
Mm.
you actually had money behind it and everything, and you could put those shots into modern CG into a movie where you have characters you care about and all that kind of stuff, it would be so exciting, even for us like aviation nerds, and then also general audience, because general audience isn't necessarily going to be able to discern between accurate looking air combat and not accurate looking air combat.
No,
They're
they
just
won't.
going to be an exciting action scene. But
Yeah.
for the nerds like us, it's far more compelling to watch than people backflipping in a P-51. um,
Oh,
so um, those animations are pretty incredible. You can find several of them on YouTube, but
yeah.
I always think of them as every time because it's so well done.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, that's my short I love Tora 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 section. We will one day talk through that whole movie because it's just
Honestly,
awesome.
I'm for actually having that as a segment for our streams where we just pick one movie that we recently watched and we did talk about it. Like I recently watched Bridge on the Over the River Kwai again, and
Okay.
there's so many things to say about that movie. Yes, there's no aviation aspect to it, but I think there's so many ways to sort of talk about the subject that we talk about anyway, sort of the also the perceptions between the different forces and how they behaved in combat and how they behaved overall in the theater. But I just want to make a big shout out here to Jack Ray, who's gifted 10 memberships to people in the chat. A big thank you there to Jack Ray for doing that, and everybody who's received a membership, please make sure to also thank him. And I believe this also now means that for basically the month of December, as with all memberships that exist on the channel, you will have ad-free early access to all upcoming videos. So that's absolutely fantastic there. Thank you very much, Jack, for your ongoing support. And Jack has actually been with the channel since almost the start, I want to say.
Oh.
2017, 2018. If I remember correctly, I still have some books as well that he gifted me back in the day. So thank you very much there for that long running support. And yeah, we at some point we need to make a video about Red Tails because everything with that movie is just
I feel like the Red Tails are almost cursed, like because it was the worst, probably the worst stuff in that recent Masters of the Air as well. Like they felt just kind of
yeah.
tacked on, and it's like just do it right. I've heard there's a mini series, like a made for TV series from the
Okay.
90s or something that I haven't seen, but
Okay.
um man, somebody needs to do that story properly.
So the one thing that always sticks with me with Red Tails has nothing to do with the movie, but it's Chuck Yeager on Twitter, mind you, back when it was still called Twitter. So this is
Mm.
about when Red Tails came out, and I saw this tweet by Chuck Yeager, who, as most people will know in the chat, is a very famous ace, and also very prolific test pilot. I think he flew like the X1 Bell and so on and so forth. Uh, Also a character, like he was very combative, sort of the stereotypical sort of fighter pilot, always up for a fight, whether that's a verbal or an actual air combat fight, from all sort of the things that you hear about him. But this tweet stuck with me, and that is he was at the premiere of Red Tails, and as part of the premiere, some sort of fancy gala dinner was happening, and they brought some real Tuscany airmen to the stage. And people started clapping, as you do. And that's nice. Then the film trailer or something, or like was it part of the production company? I just cannot remember the details here. Got to the stage, and there was a standing ovation.
Mm.
And that just stuck with me of how sometimes we interact with history, where the real people who actually fought these battles are almost considered like a footnote, but our romanticized, somewhat yeah, distorted view that we then live, or that fantasy that we live out through cultural media, is somehow more important, and the acts of the real people are considered not good enough almost. And that's what I consistently see with a lot of like Hollywood movies, where the actual I don't want to call it adventures, but the experiences, the actual experience, don't seem to be good enough to make it into the script, and you have to exaggerate in order to make things stand out, and that doesn't suit well with me. It's for example that red tail scenes where they blow up a destroyer by shooting down its chimney stack. Now I just to dissect that scene and to completely myth bust it would take me quite a while. I mean, it would probably take half an hour of my time to talk about all the different variables, but why this is unlikely. And then there's going to be some people saying, like, yeah, but like, American planes did strafe a destroyer in the Mediterranean theater and sunk it. Yeah, but not by shooting down its chimney stack. And first of all, this was a World War One or a pre-World War One destroyer, so it wasn't very well protected, and it was also rocketed and bombed as part of the 50 cal fusillade it got. So we like, I'm going to call bullshit on that, but it's those sort of moments where I'm just like, just tell the real story. Like, the real story is as significant as, sort of the as significant as it can get. It's yeah,
No, yeah,
it's
I'm
really
I'm
annoying.
generally of that opinion, and it's not the same thing as saying, oh, it needs to all be boring. It's like, no,
No,
the point we're making is that, like, we understand how movies work. Like, you have to edit things down to be exciting or for
yeah,
time or whatever else, but you can still have that core of it that is just the reality, because the reality itself is interesting. And I think, like, going
yeah,
back to Tora Tora Tora, that's what makes it so compelling for me.
yeah,
Even though there is critique out there that, like, for some people, Tora 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 is really boring. I mean, it's a movie from 1970. It is, like, as methodical as going to the dentist. I say that in a in a positive way. Um, but
It
even
also
for a
has
movie that's
a love arc, right? Doesn't it, somewhere?
no.
Oh no, I'm thinking Battle of Britain, with
Yeah,
that
so I have
nonsensical love
actually
arc.
never
Yeah.
I've seen clips of Battle of Britain, but I've never watched the whole movie because I've been scared off by the love arc. But I need to watch Battle of Britain, and we should do that at some
Okay,
point.
so the
And
love
then
arc gets in the way of a certain things, but it is representative of the relationship that pilots
okay,
had with their spouses. Um, it does get in the way a bit, but in my most recent watch, I actually warmed up to it. I'm not a
okay,
fan, but I've warmed up to it because I see it as more representative
okay.
of that sort of relationship between pilots and girlfriends, spouses, whatever.
I
Sorry,
would
I
totally
cut you off
watch
there.
Battle of Britain with you because I really do need to watch it at some point. The whole movie, not just little bits and pieces of
Repeat, please.
it.
Repeat,
Repeat,
please.
please.
Niemcy, da da da. It's just like CO2 3 1 0.
Yeah.
And
But I
it's
guess
just
the point I'm
yeah,
getting to is just like, take the actual events and do them justice. And even if you have
yeah,
to edit it down for time or, like,
yeah,
tweak little things to make it work in a filmic sense, that's
yeah,
fine. But yeah, when you just, like, you're just inventing stuff, it does have an element of, like, condescension almost, like,
yeah,
oh, what you actually did wasn't good enough. Us sitting in a writer's room are going to come up with something cooler.
yeah.
And it's like, well, then you're probably not the right people to do the movie. I mean, like, the most extreme cases of that would be a lot of, like, Ridley Scott as he gets older and crazier. And his history movies get, like, worse
I
and
heard a
worse and
rumor that he
worse.
wants to remake the Battle of Britain.
Yes, I've heard that, and I'm dreading it. I am absolutely dreading it. I am
His
like,
like when he did Napoleon, right? And like, I knew it wasn't going to be Waterloo level Napoleon. We knew that,
yeah,
right? First of all, if you're going to do Napoleon, no, I'm not going to get into this discussion. Um, but what he could have done is just do Austerlitz, which
yeah,
is
it's his
well
finest
regarded
moment,
as
arguably. Yeah.
as like Napoleon's greatest battles. Most
Mhm.
most historians, I think, would argue that. Um, he could have just done that. But then when historians started to point out the issues with all his movie and trying to like squeeze the whole life of Napoleon into, what is it, 3 hours something, um, And then his excuse is, how do you know? You weren't there.
Yeah. I've only seen clips of it, but my favorite part is when they let them think they have the high ground when they're in the movie, they're on the low ground. And I'm like,
I didn't
what?
even see that.
Oh, it is staggeringly. It is genuinely insulting how he depicted the Battle of Austerlitz. I'm like, this is terrible. And I'm not even like I actually like the first Gladiator, for example. It is like not really it's barely
It's
a
a good
history
movie.
movie,
It's a good
but
gladiator movie.
but it's a good
Yeah.
movie, and I think that kind of separates from like some of his more recent stuff where I can't even say
Yeah.
they're necessarily good films anymore. And then like his treatment of history at this point has become very obnoxious to me.
Has he done also the second Gladiator movie?
Yes, which I have not
Okay.
seen, so I can't comment on other than I know it's silly. But I mean, the
It's
first one is kind of
yeah,
silly in its own way, so I don't know. But yeah,
yeah. There's certain things that the second movie, the second Gladiator movie does. I don't want to say better, but it shows a wider spectrum of what could actually be done in the Colosseum, alongside like naval battles, for example, being played out. Um, but yeah, it's compared to the first one, it's not as good. Yeah.
yeah.
It's sad. Talking about uh, good World War II movies. I've heard Hawksaw Ridge is good. I haven't
Mm.
seen it yet. Have you seen that one?
I've
Because
seen
it's in
it.
the Pacific.
It was like a very long time ago that I saw it. It was pretty okay. Um, it was a bit over the top, but I mean that's typical for a movie. I don't know if it's just a product of me getting older. I mean, I'm not that old in the grand scheme of things. I'm only in my mid-30s, but still, it just feels like some
Look,
of the stuff.
your 30s, you wake up with a new ailment every single
Yeah, I
day.
know it's
It's
all
just,
downhill from here.
yeah,
We're on our march into the grave.
yeah.
um,
If you are below, if you are not yet 30 and in the chat, cherish these years until you're 30, because it
really,
goes really bad after
eat a
that.
Domino's pizza a day until you just can't anymore.
Don't do that. Don't do that. No. I do enjoy your little Twitter updates on what you eat for breakfast, but no, that is not a model that should be followed. Go back to your couch with your whiskey tumbler and your fireplace.
But yeah, that's I didn't mind Hacksaw Ridge. I wasn't in love with it. Like it didn't really stick with me that much, but it was okay from what I
Here's a
remember.
question on the Pacific movies.
Mhm.
Uh, Letters from Iwo Jima or Flags of Our Fathers?
I bounced off Flags of Our Fathers hard.
Okay.
And I think it was because I was not the intended audience. So I am obviously not American,
Yeah.
and Flags of Our Fathers is very like centered on like American patriotism. And as a weird unwashed foreigner, it did not. It was a complete miss for me, in all honesty. Um, I do quite like Letters from Iwo Jima.
Yeah.
That would probably be my second favorite like Pacific War related movie behind Tora Tora Tora, but it's pretty distant behind. Like Tora 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 is like on a pedestal for me. Um, but yeah.
Yeah. I preferred like Letters from Iwo Jima as well. Just because we have so few movies that are actually from sort of incorporating the Japanese perspective and how they were fighting on it.
Yeah, it does make it
Yeah,
interesting that way.
and it also
Um,
demystifies a little bit of sort of that. I want to say almost that romanticization of the Japanese craze to die in banzai charges,
mm,
because you do see opposition to it, and you do see
yes.
people who are like, we shouldn't be doing this, and some people who will
Yeah.
just go through it because of peer pressure, and others who are obviously, completely indoctrinated in that sort of regard. And I think
Yeah.
that's quite good. I would have liked to see a little bit more from the Japanese side in the Pacific, but it was obviously meant to not
Yeah, that's
be
like a
like, it's
POV thing.
obviously from the American perspective.
Yeah, I quite like the
But
Pacific. Yeah.
more than Band of Brothers.
I would say so. I would say overall as a series, Band of Brothers is stronger. Like it is consistently at a pretty high level. Whereas the Pacific is a little more uneven, which I don't think is a particularly controversial opinion.
Mm.
And I will say the best Pacific episodes I like more than Band of Brothers. But
Yes,
taken as an overall series, Band of
yes.
Brothers is stronger. Would
I
be
also
my
think
take.
the ending from the Pacific is really interesting because Eugene, it is Eugene, right? Yeah, it's Eugene.
Yeah, Eugene
Um,
Sludge. Yeah.
he he comes home and he's traumatized from the war, and then I believe it's his brother who went to Europe and had maybe an easier time and brings back all this memorabilia, and he's like, oh, here's a flag that I captured or whatever from the Germans, and his family is all interested in, oh wow, we all these Nazi things, we heard so much about them and so on and so forth, and they completely ignore Eugene and don't understand why he can't come back from his experience of the war and present it as some sort of noble adventure, which I think is a really interesting take. Or not an interesting take; it's a much needed take on the experience of war, and especially considering that this was an American production studio, is a bit more nuanced than some of the other sort of war movies that we see from that sort of Hollywood writer room that came out before and after, mind you. And this is also why I like some of the older war movies. There's plenty of bad older movies, like Battle
Oh
of the
yeah.
Bulge is horrible. Like,
I've
like
only heard the
everybody's like,
stories. I've
oh,
never seen that one, but
I mean, everybody is like in love with that. Well, I don't want to say in love with that movie, but like there's that scene where they sing the Panzerlied, the Germans, right? Abstürmte der Schneit, blah
oh,
blah blah blah
okay.
blah. And that's it's like, oh, look at these young boys. It's like, no, like no. um, there's no reason to romanticize the German army and like Hitler Jugend kids being drafted into the Panzer divisions, but
Hmm.
you do you, internet. But the some of the older movies do a much better job of sort of looking at it in a little bit more nuanced way, I find. And I found that interesting with the Bridge over the River Kwai as well. And that actually made me look a little bit more into the history of the individual people that are being depicted. To the point where I found out that the real Saito, so Colonel Saito, not really spoiling anything here because it's Japanese prisoner of war camp, you would expect the person in charge to be a horrible person. So in the movie, Colonel Saito is depicted as such. Although there is some interesting interaction with I think the British major, is it? Um, that show a little bit more nuance. But in reality, Saito was actually remembered by the people to be, first of all, he wasn't a colonel, and second of all, from memory now, he wasn't a colonel, and second of all, he was actually quite a nice prison guard. So that wasn't necessarily required in the movie, but there are certain elements in that movie where I see like, oh yeah, there's a bit of nuance here, um, that makes some good points. Right. What do you think war films from other countries tend to be more
Mm.
realistic than many American Hollywood movies? Yes and no. So some of them are really good, but then Hollywood does some excellent movies as well. So let me just think. Downfall and Das Boot for German productions.
Downfalls and Dust Boot too.
Stalingrad, right?
That's another good one.
But then also we have, what's that German production? I mean, the new dashboard was not very good.
Oh, I
I
never
didn't
saw it.
watch much. I didn't
Yeah.
watch much of it, so I can't speak to the whole
Mm.
thing. But what I saw wasn't very good. And then there is our father's generation or something. Das Leben unserer Väter. I can't
Oh
remember.
yeah. Yeah.
It's not very good in my opinion. It
Mm.
overbakes the whole thing a bit. So for example, for the Germans can make some excellent movies about World War II and make some bad movies about World War II. Britain, same thing. French movies I haven't seen enough. Japanese movies I basically haven't seen any except Tora Tora Tora, which was like sort of 50-50.
Yeah, 50
Um,
50.
and I mean, there's good movies coming out of Hollywood as well. One of the hardest hitting movies I found from World War II, about World War II recently, and I keep going back to this, is Jojo Rabbit.
Mm.
Because while it is dressed up in a sort of comedic take, if you watch it and you have some experience, like you have a perspective on the German element of it, which I have, both for my history interest and because my upbringing, and you sort of have an appreciation of that culture, plus sort of the subtle ways that they show the absolute dread that was National Socialism in Germany, and how it sucked the life out of everything, the joy out of everything, and everything was done for the party. And the many subtle ways that like Jewish culture is shown, the experience of people who were running from the Nazis, people that were resisting against the Nazis, which we shouldn't over exaggerate. There weren't that many of them, but there were quite a few. It gets so many points across in a subtle way, and it's all dressed up in a comedy, which makes it even worse because you don't expect it, and then these moments just hit you. Um, all I can say is the people who've seen Jojo Rabbit, the shoes, right? I mean, the shoes hit
Oh yeah,
differently.
yeah.
It just, yeah. And I'll be honest, my take on history is always don't overly romanticize it and overly actionify it. And this is the worry that I often have when with war movies is they're touted as anti-war movies because they show the horror of the war, but then the scenes that get all the views, for example, on YouTube, are the action scenes where where U.S. Marines are shooting at like Japanese Bandai charges, and then the comments are full with like patriotic statements and so on and so forth. And sure, if you're inspired by your previous generations, I can't necessarily see fault in that unless you're glorifying the Nazis or I don't know the Soviets. If you're a liberal democracy, it's slightly different, but yeah, it's I think there is no such thing as an anti-war movie that is an action movie. If it's an action, like it's either an action movie or it's an anti-war movie. The two things don't combine really.
So my quickie take is I've seen an okay number of Chinese, South Korean, and Japanese
Okay.
war movies. Um, Generally not great, to be honest. So Chinese ones usually have all of the worst hallmarks of like the very worst Hollywood schlock that you can think of. They might have some like some of the costuming and stuff's really incredible. There might be individually really powerful scenes, but overall not great. I've even watched the one that was like basically a tax scam. And I'm trying to remember what it was called. Airstrike, I think. So it was actually about the air war in China, but then they got tied up with all this thing because they were using it for tax evasion purposes or something. And then, I mean, the movie is almost funny bad.
Okay.
It's pretty funny, and it is Airpower related. Maybe one day I'll
Maybe one
drag
day.
you into that. Um, the South Korean ones have a lot of the same. They tend to almost uniformly fall into the very worst of the love story subplot pitfalls, and like not nuanced at all.
And that's
And
just
a lot of
because I think
their
there's a proclivity, like cultural proclivity to the dramas, right?
yes, yeah. So
Korean
it is
dramas.
very melodramatic,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which for people who like that, I'm sure it works. But usually for me, I'm largely immune to that because I'm dead inside. So so
As are we all. It's like you're a military historian. You don't have any fun in your life. You just listen and
um,
read about like carnage and hey mayhem for your
yeah.
whole life.
And the Japanese ones are along a similar vein. Most of them I'm not a fan. So I've seen the Eternal Zero, which is terrible.
Okay.
That one is like not a good movie, and also I take very serious issue with, as I think Miyazaki did. It kind of glorifies like kamikaze pilots and stuff, and I think that's not appropriate. Um, and I've seen, I mean, there's The Wind Rises, which is not really quite a war movie, but it's like
So I watched
they're
30 minutes of that, and then I was like, hang on, I'm gonna finish Eagles of Mitsubishi again, like reread it, and then watch it. And I finished it, and I haven't been able to. I didn't find the time because I was like, I have to go for Miyazaki movies more in order. So recently, I watched Totoro is a Miyazaki movie, right?
yes.
He, somebody will
Is
correct if it's wrong. But I also watched Porco Rosso,
mm,
um, which I'd rather be a pig than a fascist.
fascist.
Nice, nice. Like that movie hits differently, I think, if you are an air power historian, I think, than if you're not an air power historian. I'm gonna watch
Yeah.
it with some friends soon and see what their reaction is. But there's a couple of scenes that, because I have read so much about the lives and the deaths of a lot of like pilots, that it almost brought a tear to my eye, like in one or two scenes where I was like, okay, I can see like representative, and it's really done in a really good manner. Um, and generally, I found when I look at sort of Japanese movies that the animation ones are almost better than some
I
of
think
the
that's fair.
scenes that I've seen from, like, I've only seen scenes of Japanese war movies. I've never seen a full
Yeah.
movie. Um, but when they seem to be doing animation, it brings so much atmosphere and like,
I mean,
yeah,
Grave of the
just
Fireflies is like,
haven't
man,
seen that actually yet.
I think it's on Netflix right now. It took a while
Okay,
for it to come, but that one is heavy.
that's
Um,
the firebombing, no?
yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then of course it's not particularly subtle that another um, Ghibli movie that covers like the firebombing stuff is Howl's Moving Castle. Um,
Okay.
some of the sequences in that and like it's discussion of war. Um, on the live action side of things, probably my favorite Japanese war movie I've seen is actually from the same director as the director behind the Japanese portions of Tora Tora Tora, if
Okay.
my memory serves. And that is 203 Kochi, so 203-meter hill. I think it was also translated into English as Battle for Port Arthur. It's about the Russo-Japanese War, and that one is
Mm.
like a straightforward classic war movie with like basic anti-war messaging, action scenes. It had like a lot of major characters, like are like General Nogi and other high-ranking officers. And for those who don't know, like Nogi, his life is basically just a drama. Like you don't even need to change anything. I mean, all of his sons died in the war, including at least one of them under his direct command and orders.
Mm.
And like he was just a broken man by the end of the Russo-Japanese War. He wasn't a very good officer, and he was self-aware that he wasn't a very good officer. And while you don't want to romanticize it, like he got a lot of people killed, and he probably should have just resigned a lot earlier. Um, but he does eventually end up killing himself. Um, so there's all this like real drama and stuff, and it does a pretty good job. I'm not going to say it's like the best war movie I've ever seen, but it's a solid war movie that probably most people have never seen because it's a Japanese war movie.
Yeah.
It's from like 1980, I think. So it's got a little bit of that cheese in there, like when people get shot, they go like, "Oh," and there's like ketchup blood, like that old
Mm.
date. So it's not like super grimy and all that, but it's a good one. I've heard good things as well about a mini series that I can't remember the name of, which is also about the Russo-Japanese War. It's the mini series that, like, if you look on YouTube for like live action depictions of the Battle of Tsushima, that's what it's from. Usually, is from that series, and it like follows a couple different people going through the war. I think a cavalry officer and then a naval officer, and you get like different stuff related to the Russo-Japanese War that I've heard good things about. It's more of like a drama though, so
Mm.
go into it with that lens. But I still have to sit down and watch all of it. But that's kind of my quickie take on it. So
Well, we have a good question here from before. Do you have any suggestions of missions or operations that should be put in a film? And yes, let me think. So I mean, I'm probably overthinking this because I'm now like wondering like about like story arcs and so on and so forth. Like if you want to do a self-contained operation that is a one-time thing, there's a lot of things that you could do with that, and there's a lot of movies that already exist about like about the most obvious um missions, like I don't know, Dam Busters, or like the raid on the Gestapo headquarters and so on and so forth. One would be very interesting if it's built up similarly to Tora, where it portrays both sides. Is I think the sinking of Prince of Wales and Repulse. That could be quite
that'd be
interesting.
interesting. Yeah.
To show like the British side in Singapore of what went wrong for that to happen, and equally like the Japanese side of how they managed to pull that off, and sort of the preparation that goes into that. What else? I mean, there's so many things that have already been done. Uh, I mean, the operation in sending goods to Tunisia by the Germans is just a turkey shoot. So that's not. I mean, it's action movie, I guess, but it wouldn't even be that interesting. Operation Varsity could be an interesting one, sort of from an air landing perspective, but there isn't actually that much fighting on the ground. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of low-hanging fruit, like as far as particularly naval battles or air
Yeah,
naval
yeah,
battles go, because basically they're so expensive to do that generally a lot of it's not done.
yeah.
Um, like pick basically any of the night battles off
I mean,
Guadalcanal.
the first appearance of Kamikaze. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
I
was
mean, you could even do
Philippines,
something
right?
like
Yeah,
that. Yeah, the massive kamikaze attacks and the response to it, like off of Okinawa, you could do all sorts of stuff with that. Again, various night actions off Guadalcanal because it's just so dramatic and you know, but then it's like from a filmmaking perspective, it's like how do you do a pitch black? How do you make a pitch black naval battle exciting for
yeah.
a general audience? And it's like that's a difficult question to
As a
tackle.
short movie, that could maybe work, but
Yeah.
then it would focus more on
Um,
the tactics and not
mhm.
have the time to set a stage. The air attacks on the bridges at the Meuse, at Sedan, that could be an interesting one. Um, Generally, just Sedan. That would be an interesting, like Franco-German, British production. Actually, the crossing at the Meuse. That could be interesting. I do like these sort of self-contained movies that talk
Mm.
about the early war period. Like,
Yeah.
why is it the one that was with Operation Weserübung, so the attack on Denmark and Norway, the Danish movie, April 17th of April, is that it? It's a Danish movie about the exploits. I want to say about the experience of a platoon of infantry platoon, where they're like light infantry with bicycles, and trying to delay the German advance. And they sort of fight from their early defensive position where they knock out like a little armored car all the way into a city, where then they have to surrender because, well, Denmark basically is out of the war. I mean, like the whole Norway campaign could be an interesting
Hmm.
movie. Almost better as a series, actually.
Yeah, that's the
But
thing too, is if you
won't
wanna
find the
really
money for
flesh it
that.
out.
Um,
Yeah. And I mean there's like so many different things, there's so many different conflicts that could make potentially interesting
yeah,
war films. I feel like the Korean War is still, despite the amount that have been made by South Korean cinema that I find mostly crap, frankly, and also a couple of China. The most recent one I watched was a Chinese one that was like, it was mostly very boring, um, and like until you get to just some moments, which I know our editor has sent you some of the clips of like the American in the F4U with the cowboy hat, and some of the parts in that movie has some peaks as far as laughing so hard I was crying. Um,
I mean, talking about like sort of Western sort of depictions of Japanese or like Asian or Korean people, like to see it flipped around is interesting.
it's fun.
But with Chinese movies, let's just say like a Chinese movie will not hit the cinema unless it conforms to the requirements of the
Yes.
CCP. So straight up, it is going to be propaganda.
Yeah.
And like a lot of cultural products that come out of China on the war are flat out, from what I've seen, flat out wrong and over
Yeah. Yeah. It's
exaggerations. And yeah,
not great. I want to
sometimes you
probably the
wonder how.
most interesting movie on that was I'm trying to remember what it was called, but it was about the Battle of Shanghai.
Okay.
About the it was about the legend of the was it the Siong warehouse, I think.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it was delayed because of censorship, so they cut the movie. Like if you've actually seen the whole movie as I have, you could see the promise in it, but it was cut up so badly by the censors that like entire plot lines just your main characters at the end of the movie like run off screen and you never see them again. Like there's no resolution. Like it's a mess. But it's actually a very well shot movie, and there's lots
Mm.
of like really great like little individual scenes and stuff. It's just like you could tell how hamstrung it was by the censorship, and then also it was just an over the top bombastic silly war movie. But um that one was like interesting to watch in a way that this Korean War one I watched that I can't remember the name of now. It was about them defending just one bridge, and it was such a combination of dumb and propagandistic. It was almost interesting, except it was like done in a way that was it's like Rashomon, so it's like the same event seen like 20 different times, but it's just the Americans bombing a bridge, and it's the most boring thing ever. Um, but it has some very peak comedy moments, particularly
Talking
around
about
the Corsair.
Shanghai, um, Empire of the Sun.
I haven't seen Empire of the Sun. That's another one I need to see. I've
You
seen
need
the
to watch that.
clips. I've seen,
You need to
yeah,
watch. You need to watch Christian Bale on a roof screaming Cadillac off the sky.
yeah.
I
See, I've
mean,
seen that.
that movie has set up like the mystique around the P-51 like no other movie has ever done, and it's all down to that one scene. But it's a good movie. It's honestly good. Like I read the book in school, in English class. Funnily enough, it was part of my English education, and afterwards, after we had read the movie, sorry, the book, we were allowed to watch the movie
Hmm.
in two classes, so that was fun. And obviously, back then, I guess I was like 16, so a lot of the nuances escaped me. But um, it's a good movie, and it uses like cinematography, music, composition really really well to tell its story. And again, a lot of on like things that aren't said but sort of shown and worked into the scene that you can only unlock if you know the history, or if you've started to read about the history, and if you read watched the movie a couple of times or read the book, because there's quite a few sort of hidden gems in that as well. So definitely watch that.
Yeah, I really
Yeah,
need to.
we need to make a list and have like a
We should.
monthly sort of movie club. I don't know how YouTube is going to actually handle that side, but if we could critique and do it in like small segments, I think that could work out as
Yeah, it's
standalone
always tricky.
content. Yeah.
Because I know, like,
Well,
with the live commentary thing we'll do, we'll have to just, like, get people to count down and then we'll just watch the theatrical version and talk over it. But
yeah, basically, and then
yeah.
I'll have to edit it in such a way that then we have some, I guess, some highlights that we
Mm,
can then put out as a standalone video. Um,
yeah.
yeah, but we'll do that. Excellent. Right, we've approached 2 hours and 15 minutes on the stream, so I think this is a good moment to cut. Thank you very much in the chat for all your comments and your questions and your perspectives, and also to Jack Ray, who gifted 10 of you with a membership. Make sure to use that in the upcoming uh, content release, as videos go out ad-free first to supporters, whether that's on Patreon or channel memberships. Oh, and I also completely forgot, currently there's a sale on for all my books. So if you go to the comment section, no, the description, there should be the links there. They're not there, never mind. Just click on any video that I have and you'll find the links there to the books, and they are currently discounted 20% for Black Friday and Christmas sales. So if you want to get a book from me and the publishing house, Military History Group, make sure to do that now. And yeah, any last words, Justin?
No. It was fun to soft launch our movie review channel
Yeah,
for the last 50 minutes.
we talked about that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That won't be every week. That just happened.
Oh, I mean, we can talk about anything with Airpower, I guess, and then just take it from there. All right, everybody in the chat, Justin, thank you very much for being here. And as always, have a great day and see you in the sky.
See you, everybody.
Wow, you've actually said something
I
in the
said
outro.
something.
Wow, that is, it only took 3 episodes. Great.